One of the better recent books about what this entire series is about is actually something you can grab from our welcome carts in the hallway if you like. It's called Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. Let me read the back blurb for you, and it'll give you a good window into what this series is about. This fairly common refrain that Jesus would say to people that he encountered during his 3 to 3.5 years of work and teaching among the people 2,000 years ago. Are you a fan or are you a follower? The dictionary defines a fan as an enthusiastic admirer. Fans want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not so close that it requires sacrifice. Fans may be fine with requesting a prayer, attending church on the weekends, or slapping a Jesus fish on their bumper. But is that really the extent of the relationship that Jesus wants? Jesus was never interested in having admirers. It is not fans that he's looking for. Now, if you've been with us for a few times during this series, you actually know now what Jesus meant by that phrase, "follow me." You know how someone in his day would have taken that. What he was really calling people to do is become his students. To admit that the way they had done life prior to encountering him wasn't working great. It was not all that it was cracked up to be. It was failing to meet their expectations, God's expectations, and everybody else's expectations. And then they would be willing to relearn life from the great teacher, Jesus. And 20 centuries later, Jesus continues to call out to human beings like you and me and say, "Follow me. Come and be my student." And no matter whether you're 70 or 45 or 20, relearn life from me. Because what you've learned so far in your life isn't working. And it's not right. This is the second to last week of this series where we investigate these encounters that Jesus has with people, in which he will call to them and say, "Follow me." This encounter we're going to look at today is actually one he has with his own disciples. The 12 that you know, who are the most famous, and then the others who were followers of his as well. And like I told you a couple of weeks ago when we examined Jesus' encounter with a rich young man, this is one of those passages in the Gospels that we all probably, if we were honest, wish weren't there. But you do realize that it's very important for us to talk about the things in the Gospels that Jesus says that we don't like. If we only talk about the things that Jesus says that we do like, then we're making Jesus like us. And that doesn't save anybody. So, here's the passage we're going to look at today. This is how it's recorded in the Gospel of Luke chapter 9. You would find it also in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew. In fact, this is an idea that Jesus will come around to no less than half a dozen times in your Gospels. It is one of the things that he means most when he says to people, "Come and be my student, come and follow me." Jesus said to his disciples, the Son of Man, which is a way that Jesus talks about himself, the Son of Man, me, must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes. Who are those people? We'll talk about them more in a minute. Those are the Jewish religious and cultural leaders of Jesus' day. And be killed, and on the third day be raised. Now please note, we are a paragraph into a 2-paragraph section, and we have not encountered the idea of following me yet, right? You see that? The focus is someplace completely different. Also note in that first paragraph, for those of you who have been around the church block once or twice, that may be a fairly plain, generic way for Jesus to talk about his death. We are actually fairly close to, we're a couple of weeks away from when we as the church worldwide will pause and celebrate the crucifixion of Jesus. And oftentimes in times like that, what you'll hear us say are things like, well, on the cross, Jesus paid for my sins. On the cross, Jesus took my place. All of which are good ideas, none of which come from a passage like this. This actually has something else in mind about what the cross means and why it happened. Those ideas that I just mentioned come from later in your New Testament from people like the Apostle Paul. So just pay attention that we're going to come back to this and look at it and see why it is that Jesus had to suffer and be killed on the cross that we now, as Christians 2,000 years later, revere and worship. Then immediately after saying this, Jesus went on to say to all of his disciples gathered there with him, if any want to become my followers, there's the idea, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who want to lose their life for my sake will save it. What does it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit themselves? Again, if you've been around the church block a little bit or are familiar with this passage, you might have heard that last little part translated, but forfeit their souls. Well, that idea of souls in ancient times was about the deepest, most important part of yourself, your true self, your deepest self, your real identity as a human being. So you could also translate it something like, if they gain the entire world but forfeit their hearts, forfeit their very selves. So let's talk about this fairly famous two-part phrase or sentence there in the first part of the second paragraph that Jesus says to his disciples about what it really means to follow him and be his student. Let's start with the second part of what Jesus says. He says to any human being who wants to be his student and say, I'm with Jesus. He is the guy after whom I pattern my life. He is the guy who gets to set the agenda for what I am and what I do and what I don't. Then that kind of person is going to, the quote is, take up his or her cross daily and follow him. And you think, okay, well, what's that mean? Well, back up one step. What did that mean for Jesus? What did it mean for Jesus in this passage to take up his cross? Why did he do it? Why did it happen to him? What did it mean to him? Look again at the passage, and specifically that first part, the first paragraph. What did it mean for Jesus to take up his cross? Well, again, it seems fairly plain. Jesus says, yes, I am destined to suffer greatly, to be rejected, to be killed, and then be raised again on the third day. All that seems very straightforward, not very explanatory. What's the one explanatory part that Jesus adds to his description of what's about to happen to him? It's who's going to do it. I'm about to suffer greatly, Jesus says. I'm about to be rejected. I'm about to suffer and be rejected so much that I am going to be killed. And here are the people who are going to do it. The chief priests, the scribes, the elders. Another word for these people that you would know if you read the Gospels is the Pharisees. These are the religious and cultural leaders in Jesus' day. These are the people who teach in church. These are the people to whom everyone looks for spiritual and moral guidance. These are the people who make the decisions in the community. These are the social and community leaders. These are the people who Jesus says will be the cause, the force behind his suffering, rejection, and death. This is what it meant for Jesus to take up his cross, to run across the grain of these people. Now, you think, okay, well, why did these people hate Jesus so much? These are the cultural and spiritual leaders of the nation of Israel 2,000 years ago. These are actually the leaders of God's people 2,000 years ago. Why did they hate Jesus so much? Why would that hatred of Jesus eventually result in his murder, his crucifixion? Well, maybe you've had some exposure to Jesus and the Gospels. Can you think of things from the Gospels that Jesus did that made these kinds of people so mad? You've already heard a couple in our series, this Follow Me series. Second week of the series, we talked about a figure named Matthew. Matthew the tax collector, who would have been a social pariah in his day. You think of somebody in American society who is marginalized and looked down upon, and you're thinking in the categories of what Matthew would have been like back then. And we are told about Matthew that those are the kind of people that Jesus ran with. Jesus, in fact, in that passage, if you recall, says that he did not come for the well or the righteous. He came for sinners like Matthew, because only people who know they're sick need a doctor. People who think they're well don't. And the religious and communal and societal leaders of Jesus' day hated him for living that way and teaching that. They could not abide it. Over and over, one of the things you find in the Gospels is that Jesus would break the religious and cultural rules of his day that he thought were just silly, pointless. Like, one of the things he would often do is on Sabbath, Saturday, which was supposed to be a holy day in his time for his people. He'd heal somebody, and they'd get mad. Why on earth are you healing somebody miraculously in God's name on a day when you are not supposed to be doing any work at all, Jesus? And they hated him for breaking their rules about the Sabbath. Jesus will say about these people in Matthew chapter 23, which is probably the exemplary chapter in your Gospels about why it is that these people hated Jesus so. Jesus accuses in the last week of his life these people and says to them in part, you know, you guys are so worried about making sure that you and others tithe or give your money to God's work, as small as making sure you give 1/10 of the spices in your spice rack in your kitchen. Things like mint and dill and cumin. And you completely miss the point that that's not what God cares about. God cares about far greater matters like faith and mercy and justice. And you, my friends, have missed the point. And they hated Jesus because he would point things like that out. Continuing in Matthew 23, you know, one of the things you find in Matthew 23 over and over is that Jesus would point out their hypocrisy. Later in Matthew 23, Jesus, beginning in verse 24, Jesus says to these people, hey, you know what? You're like a dirty cup. You're so worried about making the outside of this cup really, really pretty. But on the inside, it's nasty and greasy and dirty, and no one in their right mind would drink from this. And because the inside of the cup is fouled up, everything is fouled up. In the next set of verses, he goes one step further and says, you know what you people are like? You're like a beautiful casket. It is great looking on the outside, and there are dead men's bones on the inside. And they hated Jesus for saying things like that. It is the height of irony that the leaders of God's own people, the leader of the nation in which Jesus lived, Those people are the ones who would cause his rejection, suffering, and death. What did it mean for Jesus to take up his cross? It meant that he was willing to go against what was perceived to be normal, what was accepted, what everybody else might be saying, and yes, even what some of the leaders of his day would say. And so, we come to it. When Jesus then turns and looks at those who are his followers, his disciples, and says to them, you need to take up your cross daily and follow me. What does he mean? Well, you now know. Reading the entire passage together, the only possible way to take that is simply this. If you want to follow Jesus, if you want to say you're a Christian, if you want to say you believe in the Son of God, Christ, it means you have to be willing to let your commitment to him cost you every day. And it's going to cost you in a very specific way because you're going to be different. You're not going to look like or act like or do things in a way or condone things that the people around you might, even some of the religious people around you. And it will cost you, just like it cost him. Can you imagine some of the ways that Jesus might want your commitment to him to cost you? Maybe he's asking you to reach out to a Matthew in your life. Maybe there is somebody around you who is broken and flawed and lost. And it's obvious to everybody in your workplace that they are so far gone that they are beyond hope. And you know what? It's exactly the kind of person that Jesus would care about. That is the one sheep who has gone astray that Jesus would leave the 99 for. Maybe Jesus wants you to reach out to a Matthew, and it will cost you. Because other people will look differently at you. They'll think you hang around the wrong people. They'll think you're being unwise and making a poor choice, that you will be unduly influenced. Why don't you hang out with the more normal people? Why don't you hang out with the cool people? Why don't you hang out with the people who are more fun and just want to have a good time? No. Maybe you need to find a Matthew. Maybe you're just done, and you need to be done with thinking that some of the small, petty ways that Christians talk about what's important are the things that really matter. Because you're about to pull your hair out over the fact that we, like those Pharisees and scribes and chief priests that back then, as Jesus said in Matthew 23, have forgotten the more important things, like faith and love and justice, and you're tired of it. And so you're going to stop. And you're not going to live by the little rules that sometimes Christians create for one another in places like this, week after week after week. And it's a system of small do's and don'ts, things you must do or mustn't do, ways you must look or you must behave or you must not behave. And you realize, wow, it's okay for us to talk about that, but this is not the most important stuff. The most important stuff is the stuff that's right there staring us in the face that all of us apparently feel very comfortable ignoring or marginalizing, like living a life of faith that forces us to trust God for our daily bread. Like living a life where we pursue justice for the people around us. We stand up for the people who are being wronged. We are the shoulder upon which they can cry. We live a life of love where our investment of ourselves in somebody else is expensive and it costs us, but in the end we get so much back. What will you do? See, so often Christian people, when something begins to get hard in their life, they think something's wrong. Right? Who hasn't done that? Where all of a sudden you start to live the way that you hear Jesus say you should live, you try to do things in the way that you hear Jesus say you should do them, and all of a sudden maybe you encounter a little hardship or somebody around you doesn't like it, and you pause and you go, wow, I must have done something wrong here because this is not turning out well. That is not what this passage says. You may be doing something exactly right when it costs you. In fact, I dare say that's what this entire passage is about. If your Christianity doesn't cost you, maybe it's not the real thing after all, right? Take up your cross daily and follow me. Do not do things the way everybody else does. Don't merely conform to what everybody else tells you you should be. Even if it happens to be a person in leadership, even if it happens to be somebody really influential in your life, even if it happens to be another Christian, another writer, another church. These are the kind of people that ultimately killed Jesus because they could not stand what he was all about. Take up your cross daily and follow me. The first phrase is Jesus saying to his disciples, deny yourselves and take up your cross daily and follow me. Well, what's that mean? That expression, deny yourself, is one that comes up a few times in your Bible and a few times in your Gospels, in fact. For instance, when Peter, on the last night of Jesus' life, is asked 3 times, do you know this guy? He denies Jesus. Same word. What's it mean? It means to say no to something. To emphatically say no to something. So, okay, what's it mean for us to deny ourselves? What's it mean for us to say no to ourselves in the way that Jesus is asking here in this passage in order to follow him? Well, again, you have to back up a step. Because the first part of this passage is not about us following Jesus. It's about what Jesus is about to experience and why. And by whom. So you have to ask, what did it mean for Jesus to deny himself? This is weeks, months, some would say as much as a year and a half before the actual events of Good Friday and Easter. So for a year and a half, possibly, of his life, Jesus had to live with the knowledge that this was not going to turn out well. That for all of his preaching and all of his relational investment in his followers, for all of his miracles, for all the healing, for all the things that he did, this was not going to turn out well. It was ultimately going to cost him his life at the hands of the leaders of the people. What did it mean for Jesus to deny himself? Jesus, yes, Christians believe, is fully divine. We also believe he was fully human. That means he felt in that situation the way that you and I would. How would you feel in that situation? You would wake up every day, or you'd stay awake every night wondering to yourself, is this really worth it? Wow, I don't know. I need to count the cost here. Do I really have to defy these norms? Do I really have to defy their expectations? Do I really have to swim upstream so much that someday it is going to result in my great suffering, my rejection by the people to whom I came, and my death? Really? Is there not another way? Who wouldn't have thought that? And Jesus said no to those kinds of things. Jesus said no. I may feel that, but that will not rule me. I may feel that, but that will not set my course. I may feel the impulse to conform, to just be like everybody else, to just get along to go along. I may feel like just getting out into the middle of the way that our culture sees things and does things and understands things and pick up my legs and just float along that stream. But I will not do it. This is what it meant for Jesus to deny those impulses that every single one of us would have had, which means that when you think about what it means to deny yourself and follow Jesus, you have to think about it the same way. Now see, later in your Bible, in the New Testament, people like the Apostle Paul will talk about denying yourself in terms of denying these impulses we have to do wrong or to hurt people. Sin, to do sin is the biblical word. That's not what's going on here. Denying yourself here is different. Denying yourself here is about that impulse that we all have to just go along, to just be like everybody else, to not cause a ruckus or a ruffle, to just make the people around us happy, to be like them. Because when we're like them, it gets easier on us. And Jesus says if you're going to follow him, you have to deny, you have to say no to that impulse. And it will come most when it starts to cost you. This is all great in theory, to talk about being a different kind of person, to talk about walking in the footsteps of this different kind of Jesus, who really came to show humanity a different way of life, a different way of doing things, a different way of looking at things. This is all great. We can do that till we're blue in the face, but when it really costs us, then we will be faced with this choice. Do I try to continue living by the example and principles of Jesus? Or now that I've encountered a little hardship, the temperature is raised a little bit, somebody doesn't like me, somebody doesn't understand me that I really care about, I'm not doing things the way that the important people around me are, well, now what am I going to do? Am I going to stick at this, or am I going to back away? That was the choice that Jesus faced. This is the choice that every follower of Jesus faces. To follow Jesus, you have to deny yourself that impulse to conform and avoid hardship, and then take up your cross every day and follow him. And Jesus says, by the way, that there is plenty at stake in this choice that all of us have to make about whether or not we will do this. And the choice is seen in the last part of that second paragraph. If you don't want to do it, and you merely want to just save your life, and you're just going to go along, like Jesus himself would have been tempted to just go along, well, in the end, you're going to actually lose your life. And you can profit the entire world. You can accomplish great things. You can form great partnerships. You can open great businesses. Everybody in the world around you could think the world of you. And Jesus says, if you're that kind of person, in the end, you know what's going to happen? You're going to forfeit your very soul. You're going to forfeit who you really are. The choice that Jesus faced, yes, for himself, and the choice that his first followers faced, as outlined here, and the choice that you and I face, is this choice. Either A, we choose the course of denying ourselves and carrying our cross every day in following Jesus, or we lose our life. We choose hardship because we want to be distinctive and different, like our Jesus was different. We choose that, or we choose to forfeit our very selves. These are the two and only two choices we have, as outlined by Jesus. Which means that if our version of Christianity up to now, for ourselves or in some that we know, is one that's fairly easy, one that doesn't ruffle any feathers, one that is truly not distinctive from the culture in America around us, that in the end is going to have a very high price tag. And it's one, frankly, far higher than the cost of anything you might experience if you choose to do things in the distinctive way, in the way of Jesus. You know what the cost is? Your life. You go along and do things like a typical American does. You're just trying to claw up to the next better job. You're just trying to have the next better thing, the next better house. You're trying to just make it to retirement so you can stop working someday. You're just trying to be able to get to the place where you can take your family out to eat 2 times a week. You're trying to get to the place where you can afford a new used minivan for your wife so she doesn't have to drive that beater around. You're just trying to get to the place where you earn more than minimum wage. You're just trying to get out of college and get that degree that's going to guarantee your good living henceforth. Okay, that's the way that everybody around you lives. Here's the cost, your life. That's what Jesus says. It's going to cost you your life. And you're going to wake up someday at 30 or 50 or 80, and you're going to realize, what did I spend all my time on? Why did I care so much about this? I have wasted the life that I've been given. You will lose your life. And you will lose your sense of self. You're going to look like everybody else. There will be nothing distinctive or important about you. You will just be another lemming in the line walking off the American cliff. That's what you will be. Jesus says, here's the choice. You either choose to deny yourself and take up your cross daily and follow me, or lose your life. That's your choice. What do you choose today? Most of us here in this room would have come into the room saying, we are Christian people. We are down with Jesus. Are you down with this? It is not fair for us to talk about the nice ways, the good things that we like about following him, unless we talk about this stuff too. And I don't know that I like this personally any more than you do listening to it. But it's not fair for us to duck it either. What do you choose today? Are you going to go forth from here knowing that, like Jesus, you have to carry your cross every day? Which means you're going to have to deny your impulse to conform and just go along with what everybody else says. And instead you choose him, whatever it costs. And in that you have the promise of finding real life. Or are you going to shy away and say, no, whatever, I like this Jesus thing, I may even like this church thing, I do not like what we talked about today, no thanks. Then Jesus says to you, not me, Jesus says to you, someday you're going to lose your life. And you're going to wake up and regret that choice that you're making today. A.W. Tozer, a great American Christian writer from the last century, said, to be right with God often means you have to be in trouble with man. Isn't that what Jesus is describing? Then one of the great Christian psychologists who's written a bunch of books in our day named Henry Cloud says this: the key to the Christian life is not to count your critics, but instead to weigh them. Do not try to avoid upsetting people. Just make sure you're upsetting the right people. Isn't that what Jesus says about denying yourself and carrying your cross daily, just like he did? Would you take a minute here at the end of the message and pause and give God some space to speak to you and work within you about this very hard choice that all of us here face? Those of us who say we are Christians and those of us who don't, about whether or not we are willing to follow Jesus in this particular way. Take a minute, talk to God about it, and then I will pray for us all.